Hey there, you're watching the Data Dispatch. Thank you for tuning in. Today is the second video in a series introducing you to backcountry systems. Now the first was an introduction to stoves, and that was a while ago, so I'll put a link up here down in the descriptions below. You'll want to check it out. But it's worth noting that this series is not for the experienced backpacker. If you know what you're doing, frankly, you're not going to find this that interesting. But I think back several years ago when I knew nothing, and this video series is for that version of me, the complete novice. And today we're going to talk sleeping bags, so stay tuned. Alright, so you're in the market for a sleeping bag. Now, to my mind, a decision for a sleeping bag has two major branches. You want to go full bag versus quilt, and for each one of those, do you want to go synthetic versus down? That's really the major branches. There are more that goes into it, for sure, but this is where I would start if you were beginning to look at a sleeping bag. So let's start with the first branch in the decision-making tree. Full bag versus quilt. If you're really new, you maybe never even heard of the term quilt. So a full bag is like what you went camping probably in the Scouts with when you were young. It's generally either a mummy shape or a rectangular shape. It's got a full zipper, probably a hood, probably a baffle or something to keep the breezes out. Versus a quilt, which almost certainly doesn't have a hood, may or may not have a zipper. Lots of different things can be called quilts nowadays, but definitely not a baffle, and it's just going to have less features than a sleeping bag. I think it was Stick on Stick's blog who called a quilt basically a featureless sleeping bag, and I think that's basically right. So why don't we look at a couple of examples? Okay, now I'm struggling with the best way to show this, but I think what I have here are two pretty good examples of bags in their respective classes. This is the Feathered Friends Swift Ultralight 20 versus the Katabatic Palisade 30. So in the Feathered Friends full bag, I have a hood. I have a full zipper system from bottom to top. A baffle tube to keep breezes out from that zipper. Versus in the Katabatic Palisade 30, obviously no hood. In this case, no zipper and no bottom. But it does have, once this is zipped up, an elastic to tighten it up. All right, so there you go. Featureless sleeping bag here, a quilt versus full bag here. The Swift Ultralight 20 comes in at 30 ounces on my scale versus the Katabatic 30-degree bag. Now, it's a lighter bag or a colder sleeping bag. Comes in at 18 ounces on my scale, so 12 ounces different. Now, let's talk about why we may or may not want to go with one or the other. Now, it seems obvious which one you'd want to buy, right? Like, why leave a hood at home? Why leave a draft baffle at home? But there are pros and cons, so let's talk about it. The first and foremost is weight. A comparably warm full bag made out of the same material as a comparably warm quilt will always be heavier. You're simply bringing more stuff. The hood has weight. The draft baffle has weight. But maybe you're bringing stuff you don't need. Think about down, for example, particularly the down on the bottom of your sleeping bag. Down creates warmth via loft. It has to have it to trap your heat. But when you lay on the bottom of your sleeping bag, it just compresses it all, thereby, in theory, basically providing no warmth or very, very little warmth at all. But you have to carry it no matter what in the full bag. Whereas in the quilt, in the example of that Katabatic I just showed you, they just cut it out, say it's pointless. Why take it? And think about the weight differences between the two bags I just showed you. One was a Feathered Friends 20-degree bag. The other was a Katabatic 30. But it was 12 ounces heavier for the 20-degree bag. Think about what you could bring with that extra 12 ounces. A doubly warm puffy jacket if you thought you needed. A beanie. What a quilt does is gives you options. Maybe you ultimately bring the same 30 ounces, but with that Katabatic 30-degree bag, I'm going to be comfortable in a range of temperatures from, say, 50 degrees down to, if I bring a really heavy puffy and a heavy beanie, then down to, I don't know, 25, 20. I mean, I've slept in that bag below freezing just fine. Whereas in the Feathered Friends, if it's warmer at night than you're expecting, you're just going to be sweating. Okay, on to my second major branch in the decision-making tree, synthetic versus down. Now, I'm no fabric or field scientist, so a lot of this is just going to be what I've researched over time, but definitely colored with some field experience. Now, so what are the major pros and cons? Generally speaking, for the same amount of insulating value, synthetic is going to be cheaper, but heavier than down. But if it gets wet, it's going to retain its insulating properties a little bit better. If it gets wet, it's going to be warmer than down. Versus on the flip side, down, for the same amount of insulating value, is going to be lighter, but more expensive, but it wets out more easily. You'll hear that term, wets out. It loses all of its insulating value when it gets wet. But what about in the field? Now, in my experience, the wetting out argument is slightly overrated. I've owned tons of different jackets and tons of different sleeping bags in both synthetic and down, and when they get wet, they both get pretty darn cold really fast. And there's lots of ways to keep, particularly a sleeping bag, dry in your pack for not a lot of weight, not a lot of money, and pretty darn reliably. You can use a pack liner. A company like Z-Packs will sell dedicated sleeping bag stuff sacks that are waterproof, and I would way rather go that route because either bag that's wet is going to be really cold, and I would rather go with a lighter bag. Also, one thing that people don't talk about, I don't think nearly enough, is durability. The synthetic material breaks down over time, and I'm not talking about after like 15 years. After a few years of hard use, it'll just go away. This was a pretty puffy, it's going to be hard to see on the video, but a pretty nice and warm Patagonia synthetic jacket that I bought about 3 or 4 years ago. Now, I put it through the ringer, but it's basically lost all of its insulating value. I basically use it as a windbreaker now, and that's about it. Versus a nice piece of down, a nice down garment, a nice down sleeping bag is going to last you quite literally a lifetime if you take care of it. I fully intend for my kids to use both of those bags that I just showed you. If I can find it, Sierra Designs a couple years ago put together a nice compare and contrast video where they did far more stuff, and I'll try to link it in the description below. All right, outside of the major decision-making points, there's going to be a couple other little things you're going to want to keep your eye on. One is what temperature rating bag are you going to want to get. Now, if you go into a big box store like an REI, you're going to see EN ratings plastered everywhere. Now, to my mind, those things are basically BS. As an example, I have a Sierra Designs Zizou bag, and this is no shots against Sierra Designs, that's rated for 20 degrees versus my, as an example, my Catabatic Palisade 30 degree bag. That 30 degree bag sleeps so much warmer than the Sierra Designs bag. Generally speaking, the niche manufacturers are rating their bags something closer to a you will be comfortable at this temperature versus the EN ratings, which is all I can figure is you probably won't die rating. Another thing to keep an eye on is fit. If you are a small person, don't buy a large bag. That just creates a ton of extra space that your body has to heat before it starts heating that loft. And on the flip side, if you're a large person, don't buy a small bag and you're going to have to, barely fit in the bag and compress all that down. Loft is what creates warmth, and any amount of loft that you compress loses warmth. So that's it. That is my introduction to sleep systems. What would I recommend? And you're looking for one bag? If you can afford it, I highly recommend a 30 degree quilt from one of the niche manufacturers. I love my Catabatic. I think that provides you the most options across a wide degree of temperatures because, as I mentioned, it at 18 ounces in mine, it allows me to bring all kinds of extra down if I want to really push the temperature of that bag. But to each their own, so if you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments below, and if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you like this video, please hit that like button. Definitely hit subscribe. You don't want to miss any of the cool videos I have coming up soon, but until then, go have some fun outside. See you soon.